Hello and welcome back. It's Kylie Stone here, your coach in creating a new paradigm of leadership. Specifically, I want to aim towards the part that is about disruption today. In order to create a new paradigm of anything, one has to acknowledge the current situation or the current paradigm. And that can often mean change. And when I say change, often the kind of change we need is disruption. And I know this word disruption is getting thrown around a lot, but let's face it, it really is a period of time where things like COVID has disrupted the normal ways of working. Our life as we know it really is under threat. The way we live, the way we work, everything really is going through a massive amount of change. But today, the thing that I'm really interested in talking about today is that part of disruption that's not easy. And one of the things that's not easy is how do we deal with having difficult conversations? So I have to tell you, this is one of my joys, is being able to be on a podcast with somebody that I have an absolute huge amount of respect for. Kammeron Cran is somebody who I have worked with for many, many years. We go back to days where both of us were in a similar role working in News Corp. So Kammeron, we met, oh my goodness, oh gosh, going back in the early 2000s, I think 2005. Yeah. Both of us had our first child a month apart. So we navigated the early days of leadership together while juggling motherhood. You know, we just really hit it off. And, you know, it's now almost, 15 years later. Both of us are now in, outside of our traditional corporate role. We've taken on work as a coach. But Kammeron's taken, an interest in this area of working with teams. So her company is called The Team Space, and she works with executives and teams to help them impact performance. But the thing that we're going to talk about with Kammeron today is her interest specifically in helping teams by focusing on what she's called care of, I think the acronym is CAREOF, when it comes to how we have difficult conversations. So get yourself a cup of tea, grab yourself a glass of water, or if you're in the car, park yourself over and get ready to enjoy this one, because you're going to want to take a lot of notes. So Cam, thank you. I noticed on your signatory, actually in your email, you say, please call me Cam. So I'll start with that. So great to finally have you here. Third time lucky.
Thank you, Kylie. It's so great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat. I could talk about this stuff all day, as you know. But yeah, it's a joy. It's great to see you running this really important content. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, look, we are going to talk little bits and pieces about different aspects of your journey in particular. But to start on topic, I am interested to get kind of the background, specifically especially given the current climate and what many people are dealing with. I think you've really hit, a very good point about how well or not and what can we do to deal with, difficult conversations, because certainly in this climate as a leader, it's not easy, and many leaders are faced with having to make some very big and difficult decisions in a company. But more importantly, why did you kind of go down this path, and what was it that inspired you to want to do something in this area of helping people with difficult conversations?
Sure. Okay. Look, a whole lifetime of learned experience and lived experience. I think, there's not a person in the world that doesn't have to go through something like this. But in the context of the workplace, and in teams, which is the work that I'm really passionate about, difficult conversations happen, and sometimes they happen really well, and that's where teams are really performing, and sometimes they happen really badly. And people need to be trained in how to manage difficult conversations, so that they can lean into them for the betterment of the team. I think too, if you just look at the news today, yesterday, there's a whole lot of difficult conversations going on, where the outcomes might have been different had those difficult conversations been had earlier in different ways. So you think about Meghan Markle and her, mental health issues inside the palace. Well, the institution clearly is not comfortable having those difficult conversations. Why is that? and look at what the result has been. You look at, Brittany Higgins, and Linda Reynolds. There was a conversation that Linda Reynolds was not comfortable with. And I don't want to go too much into it, but I just think that both of those things really highlight how important it is that we are taught the skills and the mindset to have difficult conversations. And if you think about it in the context of team performance, it's those things that can make or break a team. So if you can have a difficult conversation and do it constructively with the right intentions, and everyone understands that because you've agreed that from the outset, that's a very different outcome to a difficult conversation where both parties leave that conversation feeling a range of damaging emotions. Now, I'm not saying negative emotions are wrong. In fact, they're incredibly important. What I am saying is that there's ways to do this. And I think, I've come up with what I think is, the guiding principles to make these conversations, work well for teams.
So one of my interests, Cam, is to, for ourselves, certainly, for anyone who's, right now here with us, and certainly for me as well, I think it helps to reflect on a time, or even maybe one that we're dealing with right now where, we know there's a conversation to have, and, we're confronted with, how do we go about this? I think many of us kind of know that there's, whether it's in our relationships or whether it's at work or whether it's with staff, at some point we, how do we normally deal with that? I think certainly if I look for myself, there's an automatic way that I think when I have a concern about a conversation I'm going to have about how I prepare for it, do I go in bullet a gate and just really kind of get what I need to say done? Or do I stop? Do I reflect on what's happening? And look, personally, Cam, for me, I've been at fault of probably putting too much concern about how I think it will affect the other person. I overthink, the fact that what I'm going to say is going to hurt them or it's going to upset them. And then I go into paralysis about not wanting to say things the wrong way. And, honestly, I think I end up causing myself more stress and harm than is necessary. So, I certainly have a lot to learn in this space myself, from that perspective. In your experience, I kind of want to put the spotlight on that yourself, like I suppose from your view, certainly what have you seen, what's been your experience, I suppose, if we start from there?
Look, I guess there's a couple of examples. I had 25 years in corporate Australia. I had 4 of those overseas in London. And so I've seen, I've worked in small companies, I've worked in really large companies, and I've seen, firsthand some awesome leadership, and I've seen firsthand some really challenging, let's just say really crap leadership, damaging leadership. And I guess, my whole purpose around my team space business is around making, workplaces and teams places of fulfillment and meaning for people, so that they feel safe and fulfilled going to work. Because I believe if that's the case, the impact of that is going to be stellar performance, whatever your metrics are, and the impact on community and society as a whole. So I sort of come at it from that perspective. So, my drive is to help organisations do teams really well. In terms of, my own personal experiences, I mean, I was a very ambitious, perfectionist, career-driven woman who wanted to have it all. We can talk about that another time.
Well, I think there's plenty of us out there, Kammeron, plenty of us out there.
I'm a reformed perfectionist. But, certainly, on both sides of the coin. So, I've been in situations where I've been deeply uncomfortable about that's something that I've observed, in the, around gender and, how certain, men might have behaved in the workplace. Language, the whole unconscious bias thing, there is so much work still to be done. We haven't even scratched the surface.
Yeah.
So I've observed things, and I've wanted to say something and not felt like I could. And I think part of that comes from, you know, as women, we're indoctrinated to please. We really are. We're not allowed to be angry. You know, we're not allowed to. If we speak up, we get certain words attached to us. So I think on the side of witnessing things and feeling like I wanted to have a conversation and really just not knowing how and not having the courage and the bravery and the tools. And certainly, you know, I have been in a personal situation where something really inappropriate happened to me when I was 13 years old, and I didn't do anything about it because I was ashamed, you know, but I didn't do anything wrong. So, you know, there's that whole being able to have that difficult conversation with my parents. I just didn't feel I could do it.
Yes.
So, you know, that's one side, and that's a really sort of, I guess, personal side of things. But then there's the other side where, you know, you've got a team member and you've witnessed some behaviour, or you think they've got a bit of a blind spot, or the way they've behaved has offended another staff member. You know, I had a situation in a team where there was a real, how do I describe it? You know, a difficulty between two different cultural backgrounds in the team. And it was just extremely delicate and hard to navigate. And what was really good is that, you know, the person who was feeling aggrieved did come to me and say that and this is probably 14 years ago, before we had the language of D&I really being mainstream. And so being able to work through that, which, you know, wasn't easy, but in honour of her bravery coming forward, I just had to sit in that, as uncomfortable it was. I didn't have the answers. I wasn't trained in, you know, that sort of language, but it taught me how important that is. But, you know, then I think, you know, the perfectionist in me in my early days of working with people and running teams, you know, the whole feedback thing, you know, I've got to give you some feedback. I mean, that can be a really triggering word for people. I've had it done to me. I've had someone say, I want to give you some feedback, and then they've just torn me to shreds. And I've been so emotionally triggered that I haven't heard for a second what they're even saying. You know, I've gone into my corner of, it's not me, it's everyone else and everything else. And I think, you know, I guess where I'm coming from is that it doesn't have to be that way. You know, but most of us don't get trained in that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there's so much in what you've shared, Kammeron. And look, firstly, I think what's present for me is having known you, and certainly I think this is the case for many women, I've got to say. And look, I know that it's not a gender thing specifically, but I will call it as a strength, certainly a strength that I think that you have. You know, you've always certainly been somebody who I know people have always felt safe in communicating with, and I think it makes you the perfect person to do this work, really, because, you know, there are obviously a lot of lessons and things that you manage to deal with as a leader, with people who had the comfort to go to you to talk about things that were really difficult. The second thing is, I do think you're absolutely right, and thank you for your willingness to share your personal experience, because I do think that's where it starts, Kammeron. And I think, you know, like you, I was 12 years old and was in a difficult situation, and I too didn't have you know, I felt silenced, mostly because I was too scared that if I said something, I'd get in trouble. And so I didn't say anything. But who at 12 years is certainly back in those days, and we're talking over 30 years ago, plus, you know, there was no education in my, you know, and look, all amount of respect to my mother, right? I mean, my mother was, you know, only 16 when she was born, and, you know, I wasn't raised with a father. And so she had her own challenges, which meant for me, certainly my access to any kind of decent amount of training and that kind of stuff didn't happen. But I don't think we ever need to, you know, look at a situation like that for anybody to know. I mean, I'm even me, Kammeron, you know, I've got 3 kids, and I don't think I've yet done any work to teach them about how to have a difficult conversation. And I've got a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. So I do think it's important that firstly, thank you for bringing that up. And you mentioned the word shame. And then secondly, you mentioned really the lack of training that's not there. And so I do think that there's a lot of compassion that can come knowing that there is some work to be done, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And look, in all of my coaching clients that I have, I would say without fail, this issue comes up at some stage, whether they've been given some feedback in a really, not helpful way, or they've had to give feedback, or they're struggling with how to give feedback to one of their own, say, team members or their boss or what have you. It comes up all the time. It is uncomfortable. And it always probably will be, but it'll be less uncomfortable and more constructive with better outcomes on performance if we are really intentional about learning how to do it well.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, shall we? Because I really love your acronym that includes the word care in it.
I love a good acronym.
Oh, I think it's fabulous. I've always thought to myself, geez, I'd love to come up with something that has an acronym because it's obviously really good. Anyway, I'm just so impressed. So for everyone, let's now get into it. Can you talk us through what you've discovered as a way to deal with this?
Okay, sure. So, I guess I'd start by saying that, this is my own invention, if you like, of bringing together, my own language and, all of the learnings that I've had from my own experience. And, I read voraciously and I interact with lots of other people in this space. So there's probably a lot of credit that I have to give to other people, and I'll reference them along the way. But where I've come from is that I did some work last year with another coach and leadership development guru, Andrew Williams, in Melbourne. We did a big research project around the impact of COVID on teams. We developed a leadership framework called Purposeful Teams, and we ran a public program, and we wrote a playbook, which I just have to show you because it's so fabulous.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And everyone who's now listening to the audio, you're going to have to go jump on YouTube to watch the rest of the film so you can see it. It's very
and I guess through all of that process, I've distilled what I think is some guiding principles around having difficult conversations. And the reason I've come up with the acronym CARE of, if you like, is because feedback that I received consistently throughout my career was around the fact that it was clear that I cared for the people in my team. And that's true. And people do sort of talk about me as a natural connector, but where that care comes from is not a sort of softly tiptoe around the edges. It came from a deep sense of responsibility. And with that responsibility comes the necessity to be able to have conversations that aren't easy. And so for me, some people feel like that in order to, that they can't be caring because they'll be perceived to be soft. And I would say, no. If you really care, within that, there is some really hard stuff that isn't soft at all, which is why I absolutely lose my shit when people talk about soft skills.
Yes.
They're the hardest ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone can go and learn technical stuff, really.
Yes.
This stuff is hard.
Yes.
And invisible,
Yes.
So, let's talk through it. So,
yeah, great.
Care of, and when I say care of, I mean care of self, care of others, team, care of your organisation, care of the impact that you have on your customers, and care of society as a whole. And it's lofty. It's probably not something that'll be achieved in my lifetime, but
well, you know me. I'm not going to have that. There's certainly a dent to be had. So let's just say already, Kammeron, I think before we've even touched on that, what's behind each of those acronyms, I'm already hearing the very first and most important thing that each of us as leaders need to, certainly can see as an opportunity here is that to see care of self is a critical requirement in taking action to do this. And I know from seeing the statistics, the increase in mental health in the workplace, the rise of suicide and the highest levels of suicide of male 40 to 44 years of age, or the increase in stress-related diseases like autoimmune conditions. The list just goes on. So I think first and foremost, just the very fact that you've raised care of as a priority on taking care of self, I think, look, if I ended this podcast right now and here I told everybody to go do just for this reason, we would see a massive shift in people's attention on actually taking the action. So first, I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for saying that. So let's get into it. Step number 1 is C for
connected and curious.
Ooh.
So we all know that, well, if any of us have studied anything to do with, human beings and our needs, we know that we need connection. We need to feel a sense of belonging. And, there's oodles of data out there around, the fact that people who don't have that sense of connection and sense of belonging are more likely to have mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. So I think, it's really important that people know how to build great connections in their teams. And for me, that's about being curious. Because if you're really curious about the people in your team, you're going to ask them about themselves. They're going to feel like you genuinely care. You listen, they feel heard. You talk to them, they feel seen. What you're saying to them is that I'm interested in your life. I'm interested in your position, in your opinions. I don't have all the knowledge. Let's build the knowledge together. I think it helps you distill some of your leadership so that you're not being the knower of everything, which is disempowering for the people around you. So the reason I think connectedness is really important, and it's something that Andrew and I talk about in Purposeful Teams. Connected relationships are incredibly important in Purposeful Teams. It's one of our 6 dimensions in that model. But the thing about connected and curious teams, if you've got those deep relationships because you've been curious with each other and you continue to be, it's not ticking a box. And this is the thing. It's not like making a list of everyone's husbands and wives and partners' names so that you can remember that. It's actually like really caring. And if you don't, I'd ask you why you're there.
Yeah, of course, my sniggle in the background is from association, not from I think it's funny, right? But it's so spot on, right? I mean, how many times you're in an interaction? It's certainly if I reflect back in the workforce, what's the point of the tick and flick of just knowing someone's name if or writing down the names of their family and their kids' names if it's just for being able to recall a name? I mean, that's really a disservice, really. I mean, I think we'd label that under inauthentic, wouldn't we?
I think we would. I mean, my point around connected and curious teams is that when you have that, difficult conversations are much less threatening. It becomes part of what we do.
Yeah.
So the next section of this is around accountability above all else. And when we talk about accountability, and again, this is something Andrew and I worked through in our model, it's so often talked about just in the context of the individual. So we talk about individual responsibilities, those individual responsibilities, they're attached to your individual role. It's in your KPIs, it's in your performance agreement and your development plan. And what ends up happening, and I've seen this, is that you end up with misaligned individual accountabilities. And that has people working at cross purposes, which can be just incredibly wasteful in an organisation, wasteful in terms of energy, wasteful in terms of time, and obviously money. So where I'm coming from is where teams create this collective accountability for themselves as a group and they come up with that, then it provides a framework for them to have peer-to-peer conversations around what they're accountable for. And it means that those difficult conversations are had in the framework, if you like, of what I call constructive intentions. So if a team has that, if it has group accountability, then anyone in the team can have a difficult conversation, not just the leader. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. So let me just see that I've got this right. So what you're saying is it's not accountability just at the level of individual in how I'm experiencing something or how I'm contributing here, but it is a lens that says, I'm looking from my accountability as part of the team and how it plays out on the team.
Yes, but more so, it's the team signing up to a set of behaviours.
Right.
For the team.
Right.
So,
fabulous.
You know, one of those things might be, and this, this is in Andrew and my playbook. One of those things might be, we will provide open and honest feedback to each other, even when it's difficult.
Yeah, right.
That might be a statement, and everyone signs up to it. And then you start training people in the language to use. So something occurs in the team and someone observes it and thinks to themselves, that's actually not in line with what we signed up to. They can say, hey, I think I need to have a difficult conversation with you about accountability.
I really like that. It's just brilliant. I mean, I'm already thinking, oh God, I think I need a team. Like, oh my God. But, two things that stand out about that. One, firstly, the experience called I am not on my own. Secondly, I don't have to handle this all by myself. I can go to someone. If I'm experiencing difficulty, I'm no longer looking from what do I think I need to do in order to deal with this. I could go to one of my team members and say, hey, and really open up and share about, what's going on. And then actually having somebody there to support you in the process, right? It's just great, Kammeron, just great.
Thank you.
What's next?
Okay, so we've got R. R for respect and responsibility. And, they're two things that I think are, incredibly important just in life generally. And they're similar to accountability as they're relevant to both, team and self. But I think if you think about acts of respect and responsibility, they provide a motivation for those difficult conversations. It moves it out of discomfort a little bit, if you like. So if you say, I respect you, therefore I'm prepared to be uncomfortable to have this conversation to move things forward for us as a team. As an individual, I'm going to take responsibility for that in the context of the team. And then because I respect myself, I want to participate in something worthwhile that creates meaning for everyone in the team.
Can I call something here? So I just want to call something out, right? And I know this sounds really easy, but I just want to call it because I do think, and I certainly know that I've been at fault for it myself, is to ensure that dealing with this highlights the fact that some people actually don't carry respect for the people with whom they actually are going to have this conversation with. And, I'm reminded of the thing that you said at the beginning about how, one of the automatic reactions we have when we know something's not gone right is to kind of put the blame outside of ourselves. That's the company, it's the boss, it's the somebody else they did, and then we're at the effect of that, right? And I'm not pointing the fingers here, by the way. I've been right there in it myself. And, and there are some areas where I've been really stuck on a difficult conversation. I've got to be honest with you, Kammeron. Sometimes those difficult conversations have been with people that I have not had a high degree of respect for. So I like that you brought this in, and I want to be straight about this and call it, because I dare say I would certainly know that there are some areas where I would be challenged with creating respect, where I have an opinion that, and so therefore the dealing with this part for me is about, okay, I've got to be willing to deal with what's in the way about me creating respect in this, not from who this person is showing up as, but respect for who they are beyond all the bullshit, for who they are as a human being. So I know it sounds easy, right? But I've got to call this one on myself too and go, is this one of those ones that's going to be a little bit more challenging?
I think it is. And I think for so many reasons. I mean, most of the time you don't know what's going on with other people. It's that whole iceberg analogy. All you see really is the tip. And this is why these connected relationships are so important. And the curiosity to build deeper relationships with people are so important. I mean, I think, in that situation that you describe, if you're not feeling respect for the person that you want to have the difficult conversation with, then what's your intention? But if your intention is because of your values and, maybe the organizational values, you think it's really important to have that conversation, and you respect yourself enough to sort of lean into it because it's for the benefit of you and your team and the broader organization and society as a whole, then I think that's where respect comes into it. You don't have to respect that other person, and you won't. That's just reality. You won't respect every single person that you work with.
Yeah, but so I love the fact that you put this in the process, actually, because I do think it does highlight there are some really, really great things that you've highlighted that one can do to notice that if that is a challenge or a difficulty for you, that you've got here some recommended ways in where to look. Where is your intention? What are you focusing on? How does that? And I love the fact that you brought up but what about respect for self? Like, I tell you, I've been trapped in thinking that it's a lack of respect out there for others. But did I actually then look at, but have I considered that actually this is more about having respect for myself? Oh my God, if I had a look there in those occasions, I would have gone for it,
Yeah. Yep.
So it's just really brilliant. Anything else to say about the respect part?
No, I want to move on to one of my favourite words.
Oh, yes.
Off the back of International Women's Day, and E stands for empowerment in this framework, if you like. And, when I think about empowerment, I feel like I'm empowered when I have a kind of deep sense of alignment in myself. When I think about it in terms of when I've worked in teams, in organisations, when I feel trusted and autonomous to, deliver. And this is, I think, is the more empowering thing, is that even though you might be overwhelmed by what you have to deliver, that you've got the confidence in yourself to kind of problem solve. And you've got the networks around you to tap into to help you with that, to collaborate on that sort of stuff. I think, as a leader and anyone in a team, you don't have to be the leader in that role. How do you go about creating that sense of empowerment for other people around you? That's about nurturing talent, in the context of others. When you do that, you end up with what is described as a sort of deliberately developmental culture. And, that's another thing I'm super passionate about. But a deliberately developmental culture, that's difficult conversations are just part of the pathway on the road to success. It's a mandatory, it's a given. And I think if you're feeling disempowered on the other side of that, don't just sit there and feel disempowered. Have the conversation. Be brave and talk to your leader that you're feeling disempowered. I mean, this comes up a lot. People talk about how their boss micromanages them. It's really common. Yeah. Right. And how do I manage up in that situation? I think it's a difficult conversation that you have to have, not only for yourself, because if you're feeling that way, chances are other people will be too. So the O in of.
Oh, before we go to O, can I say I so love that you love that one. Like I'm already going, the deep sense of confidence one has when one's empowered. But the thing that I really loved about what you said too is the part about, the playing out how you give support and have others around you support. Like, this is one of those ones where this is not an individual game, here. This is really about looking at what, even the thing that I'm reminded of, Kammeron, here is around high performance capabilities and the actual degree to which people are not specifically clear about their talents. I've seen people who are very good at certain things, and I've got to say, even I've had a lot of clients, right, who, when I've done the work with them around their high performance capabilities to discover their talents, they're mind boggled. They're like, wow, I didn't actually realize I was that talented at that. And I said, yeah, well, why do you keep wasting your time doing all this stuff? Like, get somebody else to do that stuff. You don't have to be the expert on doing this thing. You can get someone else to do it. And I think this is a really great lesson, because I think as leaders, especially as leaders, but even as individuals not in a leadership role, we often think we have to handle everything ourselves. And so I really love that you've brought that distinction in around, the people around you who can contribute to this process. You don't have to deal with everything. So anything you want to say about that?
Look, what you've made me think of is, this whole area of resilience. So if you think about empowerment as being a really important part of being able to have difficult conversations in teams, part of that is how you build that support network around you and how you be part of a support network for others. And so part of the neuroscience of resilience, as you will know well, more than I do, it is having those people around you, is this sort of collaborative 10A, if you like, to the way you work. Because if you've got networks and support, you've got people to bounce off and draw on, two heads are better than one, all that sort of thing. But again, I think that ladders up into empowerment.
Yeah, totally. And in fact, I'm reminded of a kind of a micro task on this one is actually how disempowered people get in making a simple request. It's no wonder they end up disempowered when they've actually got no skill. And I don't say no skill, but they find it really difficult to ask for help. If you can't make a simple request of somebody to help you do something, where do you think that's going to end up? Eventually you are going to get trapped in this cycle called I am disempowered because you're trying to do everything by yourself. So it's really interesting how simple things like that can mount up, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, we could go on a rampage about this particular distinction in itself. So let's come back to the O.
Sure. I want to talk now about sort of mindset and heart set, for want of a better word. So O is the open mind, open heart. Because I think if you don't have an open mind, you can't learn. And if you don't have an open heart, you can't connect with people. So I think, for everyone, ask yourself next time you see someone, say, deflecting or being defensive, or when you feel yourself behaving that way, what are the emotions that you are feeling and why? Try and get to the bottom of it. It's got to be more than happy, mad, or pissed off. And I've stolen that completely from the Brené Brown, Susan David podcast, which is fantastic. I think I'm going to get the sample size wrong, but 16,000 surveys, and the mean of emotions, they asked people to describe all the emotions they've ever felt, and the mean of emotions were 3: happy, sad, and angry.
Right.
So I guess what I'm talking about is try and work out what your emotions are beyond that, and the reasons why you're feeling that way. Because when you do that, you will get back to a place where you're not triggered. So open mind, open heart, stay open. Don't close up. If you close up because you've been emotionally triggered, you can't stay in the learning space. And that's why I think, the heart and the mind being open is just so important. Because it helps you to get back to a place where you can be constructive. And you look at the world around us, it is so complex. It is just so difficult. And we need to stay in problem-solving mode constantly. You can't be there if you're triggered.
Look, I'm really glad you brought that one up. In fact, I do want to shout out at this point, if you've not listened to the interview with Brené Brown and Susan David, do yourself a favor, Google search it on the podcast. It's extraordinary. I know you're a big raving fan. The book also, I'm going to plug Susan David's work called Emotional Agility, 5-step process in there. It's absolutely extraordinary. I saw her talk a few years back and had the chance to meet and chat with her. It really, Kammeron, it's been a real weakness for me. I grew up being taught to get on with stuff, put chin up, get over yourself. And so I spent most of my life suppressing my experience of emotions and then getting into the corporate world. I think the first day I ever cried or got emotional, honestly, in front of anyone was actually in 2000. And actually, I never forget the day, March 5th, 2014. It was the same day as my son's birthday. And I got an email with news that one of my colleagues, somebody that I'm sure you will remember, Ian Schmidt-Weichart, who had, I thought the email was to let us know that he was coming back to the workforce because there was all these restructures and changes going on. But then, as I sadly discovered, he had that previous weekend committed suicide. And I could not, one would think shit is something like that. It's actually impossible to refrain your emotion, right? I was just a mess. Anyone said anything to me that day in the office and I fell apart. And that, Kammeron, we're talking 2014. I started my career in 1991. That's a long time. So, became very trained, especially in the workplace, to withhold my emotions, to suppress them. But I was also very good at it, Cam, in doing it in my personal life. But I've got to tell you, I'm really proud of myself, because this morning I had one of these moments where I just woke up, and I actually have these a lot, to be honest. I woke up this morning crying, just present to my own pain and suffering as a woman who is highly successful and had a great career, but currently dealing with the trappings of a Western society that has women suffering, where they are the biggest market impacted by COVID. We're like 50 plus women who are suffering in poverty because of the situation they found themselves in, where they have stepped out of the workforce. And honestly, this morning I just woke up in tears going, oh, I've got to do something about this, and to know that actually that is to be able to express and be present and allow our emotions to be there is where the gold actually really lies, really.
So true. Yeah. But it's about developing our sophistication in terms of understanding our emotions. It's, again, also, and this is something I learned through the Living Leader program, which is Penny Ferguson's program. Look it up. It's brilliant. It's not her piece of work, but she references it. I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's this, choice and reaction, or stimulus and reaction, or stimulus and choice and response. So in between stimulus and response, you have a choice. And that's, I think, emotional agility. Maybe that's different to Susan David's definition, but that's being able to go, actually, I'm not a prisoner of my emotions. They're really important. I've got to feel them. I've got to understand why I feel them. But they're not going to be the thing that necessarily drives my behaviour.
Absolutely. Big advocate. I mean, God, there's a whole world of a conversation about that and the benefit of mindfulness and practices, etc. Right? Yeah. So where are we?
All right, we're up to F, right? F for of. So that's the last one, is around feedback, and I'm calling it feedback as fuel. Mm-hmm. So feedback can be a trigger word for people. All of us will have had some sort of muscle memory associated to someone saying, I've got feedback for you. I think I talked about my personal experience before. But in a deliberately developmental culture where you have psychological safety and connected relationships, feedback is like the power that drives the team forward to that common goal. Team members understand it, they understand that it's fuel, and that the intentions of the person providing the feedback are absolutely honourable. It's all in the interest of the team. In a football analogy, we're playing the ball, not the person. It's the work.
Do you play football?
Pardon?
I'm trying to imagine. Do you play football?
Do you know what? If they'd had AFLW when I was in primary school and high school, absolutely. I love it.
I'm petrified. My daughter's just signed up for rugby league, and she's 12, and she's also playing A-League soccer, mind you. She's an, and I said to her, same thing. I was like, I'm not sure I would have gone the rugby league side, but oh my God, if soccer had been available for me as a kid, I was there.
Yeah. Same with cricket. Anyway, let's not go down that.
No, we're not going to go down that one. So
what I sort of wanted to finish up with on feedback is that, without feedback, you can't have iteration. Feedback can be, it's verbal or it's data.
Right.
It's data. That's your feedback. That's the results of your experiment. Okay, what do we do next? You can't have challenge without feedback. There's no intellectual friction. Without intellectual friction, you don't have innovation. So, to kind of simplify that concept, I like to think about feedback as fuel, and I think people need to make it like a hero word in their organisations, so it's not scary.
Well, I think when I hear the word fuel too, I'm also hearing growth, and I've said the same thing about disruption. Your only access to growth really is disruption. So how do you get to identify those blind spots or the areas where you've not seen anything before if you're not willing to have that conversation? So I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, there's a and some people might not want to use the word feedback, and I actually have heard another some different languaging around that, which is in a coaching environment. And this has come from, I think it's Peter Davidson, David Peterson or David Goldsmith, I'm not sure which one it is, talk about in a coaching situation rather than using the word feedback, talking about, okay, I want us to do some work together. And that being the language, because that kind of, it makes it a joint equal conversation rather than me to you one way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So that's the model, or the guiding principles, as I call them. And I think the way to start this conversation in your organization is actually to start the conversation. Let's say to your team members, say to your boss, say to HR, whoever you think is the right person in your organization, I want to have a conversation around difficult conversations, because I think it's important, and I think it will make us better at what we do.
Yeah. So I think firstly, the steps are really clear, and I can see the connection between all of them as well, to really empower people to go through from being stuck to not being stuck. In your experience, or certainly if you're currently just looking at what is the very first thing, you just started to say, if you're in a team environment, go and have a conversation with someone where you can have that difference. So if that was the scenario right now, just say hypothetically, we've got a difficult conversation we know to have, whether it's at work or anywhere in life. As a first place to go, what would you suggest?
So me being me, I would use some stimulus. So for example, and this is why I think this can be really helpful for people, is I would actually say, hey, I've seen this person talking about difficult conversations. They've got this model. I think we need to have a serious look at it, because I feel like we've got undiscussables in the team. I feel like there's things holding us back. I feel like we could be better, but for these reasons. And we need some help in having those difficult conversations. We need a kind of scaffolding, if you like, to help us get started. Mm-hmm. And I think then, what you're doing, it's not coming to your boss as criticism or your other team members as criticism. It's actually coming at it with something to use, a place to start. And I think half the time we don't know where to start, and so we don't do anything. I mean, you think about the sort of different behaviours around people who need to have difficult conversations. Some will go, yep, okay, I've got to have a difficult conversation. They set up the meeting, they deliver the feedback, they've ticked the box, they write a file note, and they put it, they're not even listening, they just deliver. I've seen that. I've received it, as in I've had that happen to me. And then there's other people who agonize over it. You talked about it before. I'm terribly worried about upsetting someone. I don't know how to handle people if they get upset, because here we are again. We don't know how to deal with difficult emotions. And so they don't do anything. And then the moment passes, because if you don't do it when it happens, you lose that opportunity. And I say opportunity. It's not the opportunity to provide feedback. It's the opportunity to nurture a relationship or nurture some talent. And then there's, the other version, which I think is those of us that sit back and reflect. If we've been triggered, we sit back and we go, oh, I've been triggered. What does that mean? Okay. Or if it's feedback that you actually need to deliver, or a conversation you need to have, then you do that kind of, observe yourself in the situation. Imagine the best way to have this conversation. Your intentions are pure. It's about moving the team forward. It's not about ego or turf or politics or any of those things. And if that's your motivation, then your intentions aren't authentic. And I don't want to end on that note, but
well, let's go to this part. So I'm gonna say a couple of things to wrap up, and certainly because, well, firstly, if if you do have a difficult conversation, I'm going to suggest you just re-listen to this podcast so you can make some notes on one thing you can do. That's a great place to start. Plus, also, you could give the podcast to the person you have to have a difficult conversation with as an interesting concept. But Cam, to end today's conversation, I certainly we're going to put into the show notes just some some links for people to reach out to you to learn more about the work that you're doing in this area. And what I normally like to do in the interview is really look from completing a sentence for me around your views about who a leader is, and to complete a sentence. So I'll give you the sentence and then I'll come back to you after I kind of then point to a couple of other thoughts I've had about where to from here. So a leader is someone who, okay, so I'll come back to you. So here's my recommendation, folks. Make a list on a piece of paper about any current difficult conversations you feel you need to have. Is it any difficult conversation you need to have with your partner? Is there a difficult conversation with your kids? What about with your boss? What about with the teammate? Firstly, just get present to the degree to which you have a number of them. And then my tip number one is always take one micro task. What is one? Just take action on one, because I tell you what, if you can tick one off the box, you're way beyond where you are today. Once you've picked the one, go back over to the podcast, listen to the notes or take the notes you've got on the acronym that Kammeron's pointed out around connected, accountability, respect, empowerment, open heart, and fuel, feedback as fuel, and see and ask yourself, which one of those things do you think you could apply immediately as the very first thing to getting you to the next phase? So there's my takeout on today. We'll put all the links into the show notes. So Kammeron, a leader is someone who
cultivates an environment where teams flourish.
Beautiful. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing what you've contributed about this conversation for people, and for all the work that you've put in to actually get to this point. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Kylie. I really appreciate it. It's been great fun.
Thanks.